In 2010, the European public finance system seemingly broke. Global capital markets seized, and Greece entered a sovereign debt crisis widely analyzed as a unique failure of the modern Eurozone experiment. The mechanics of the collapse followed a clear sequence. First, a massive boom in private foreign borrowing. Second, a sudden stop where international markets completely locked Greece out. Finally, the intervention of the Troika, foreign official entities stepping in to manage the fallout. Looking only at the 21st century, this sequence looks highly specific to modern monetary policy, but history contradicts this view entirely. In 1893, Greece endured the exact same sequence: a surge in private foreign lending, a sudden halt to credit, and the arrival of an external authority, the International Financial Commission, which took direct control of public finances. Economists Carmen Reinhart and Christoph Trebesch compiled the data and found that the 2010 Eurozone crisis is not an anomaly. It is the fourth iteration of a predictable cycle that has repeated over 2 centuries. The primary driver of these recurring crises is not the total volume of a nation's public debt. The core vulnerability is a structural condition known as external dependence. The severity of a debt crisis is dictated by who holds the paper. When a state owes money across its borders to foreign institutions, that external debt possesses sharper teeth, methodically stripping a nation of its macroeconomic defenses. This chart shows Greece's external borrowing before World War II. Massive spikes in private foreign debt appear during the 1820s and 1880s. Following these booms, markets close. The light bars disappear in a sudden stop, replaced entirely by official government bailout loans, the dark bars. In the modern era, from 1995 to 2009, Greece maintained steady, heavy bond issuance to private markets. Then private credit vanishes, and massive dark bars appear again. Post-2010 Eurozone rescue loans entirely substitute private creditors, functioning identically to the 19th century official bailouts. Stack the historical and modern datasets side by side, and the structural symmetry is perfect. A private debt boom inevitably collapses into an official government bailout. This raises a specific macroeconomic question. Why does owing money to foreign institutions repeatedly trigger these systemic collapses, while high levels of internal debt generally do not? International capital flows obey strict parameters. During a bust, debt predictably migrates from private external balance sheets to official external balance sheets. The liability doesn't disappear, it simply changes hands. Historically, external debt was clearly defined. It was issued under foreign law, denominated in a foreign currency, and held by non-residents. Greece's accession to the Eurozone created an accounting illusion. Because new bonds were issued under domestic Greek law and priced in the local currency, euros, the liabilities appeared safe. On paper, it looked like domestic debt. The metric that pierces this illusion is the geographic distribution of the creditor base. It is not about the currency, it is about who actually owns the bonds. This chart tracks sovereign bonds held by domestic residents. Before the 2008 crisis, Greek domestic ownership plummets from over 70% to roughly 30%. This cross-border migration of debt was uniquely severe, sweeping the vast majority of the nation's obligations into foreign hands. Eurozone liabilities became effectively external. They were now held by foreign entities operating with completely different economic incentives than domestic citizens. Joining a modern monetary union quietly converted Greece's internal public debt into an unmanageable external liability, leaving the country highly exposed to sudden capital flight. External debt creates a dangerous balance sheet mismatch. A government's tax revenues are deeply tied to the health of the domestic economy, but its debt servicing costs are fixed strictly to external obligations.
When domestic debt levels threaten to crush an economy, sovereign nations typically deploy a specific defense mechanism, financial repression, often executed through the inflation tax. By inflating the currency, a government can quietly erode the real value of its domestic liabilities. The debt burden shrinks mathematically, without the state explicitly defaulting on its bonds. Greece used this exact mechanism heavily from World War I all the way through the late 20th century to manage its internal financial burdens. But the Eurozone imposed a fatal structural constraint. By outsourcing its monetary policy to the European Central Bank, Greece instantly lost the ability to use the inflation tax. A sovereign state cannot tax foreign investors or official foreign creditors via inflation when it no longer controls the printing press. Without monetary sovereignty, external debt leaves a nation with exactly two rigid release valves: outright default or brutal fiscal austerity. There is an assumption that massive official bailouts represent an injection of usable capital into a struggling domestic economy. The data shows this is almost entirely false. This chart tracks Greek external bond proceeds before 1940. The dark gray segments represent massive fees that stayed with foreign issuers. The middle gray sections show the remaining money was immediately routed back out to pay old debt. Almost nothing reached the domestic economy. Map this historical data onto the 2010 Troika bailouts, and the mechanism is identical. The modern bailout funds largely bypassed the Greek treasury. They functioned as a closed loop, cycling capital directly back out to repay foreign private banks and bondholders. External bailouts do not solve the underlying insolvency of a state. They merely facilitate the migration of debt from foreign private hands into foreign official hands, entirely at the expense of the domestic economy. When a debt crisis strikes, the incentives to resolve it are highly asymmetric. Domestic creditors share the pain of a local recession. They are economically incentivized to restructure the debt and resolve the crisis quickly. Foreign official creditors, however, are shielded from the local economic fallout. They can afford to wait. This timeline of Greek defaults visualizes the result of that delay. Because foreign creditors lacked the incentive to compromise, it took 54 years to resolve the 1826 default and 32 years to resolve the 1932 default. During these protracted periods of financial autarky, foreign creditors consistently used the debt overhang to extract heavy political concessions and enforce structural adjustment programs. We see this clearly in the historical record: the guaranteed loan of 1833, the International Financial Commission taking control of Greek revenues in 1898, and the League of Nations demanding policy adjustments in the 1920s. The modern Troika, the IMF, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank, demanding primary surpluses and institutional reforms in exchange for bailout tranches, is simply the newest version of this exact dynamic. The hidden cost of external borrowing is the heavy political baggage it brings. It transforms temporary financial crises into generational losses of sovereign independence. The official community's modern strategy has been to offer maturity extensions and new official loans, specifically avoiding taking losses on the external debt. But the data proves that market access is restored and debt overhangs are broken only after a significant nominal face value haircut. The principal must be reduced. This reality applies far beyond Greece. It is a critical metric for assessing systemic risk in any emerging market today. A nation's ultimate stability is not determined by its total public debt to GDP ratio. It is determined by the ratio of its domestic savings to its external liabilities. 2 centuries of financial data reveal a consistent truth. The true predictor of sovereign collapse is the deadly embrace of foreign capital and a structural addiction